He first noticed something was wrong when his phone stopped showing ads for things he had never talked about out loud and started showing things that did not exist in any catalog on Earth. Interstellar grievance insurance, one banner suggested. Another offered, upgrade your reality perception limited time offer in your sector. He stared at the screen in his kitchen, holding a spoon halfway between a bowl of instant noodles and his mouth, thinking that either capitalism had finally achieved sentience or he had not slept enough for 3 days. The spoon slowly lowered. Then the lights went out. Not the usual kind of outage where neighbors yell into stairwells or someone curses at a fuse box. This was a quiet absence, like someone had politely removed electricity from the universe's vocabulary. Even the refrigerator stopped humming mid-thought. He muttered, "Okay, if this is a prank, I'm officially requesting better friends." The air folded, not metaphorically, not poetically. The space in front of him simply stopped agreeing with the rest of the room. The kitchen dissolved into a lattice of faint blue geometry, as if reality had been reduced to a blueprint and someone had decided to edit it without consulting him. He had time to think, very calmly, that he should have paid more attention in physics class before the floor stopped being a floor. When he reformed, it was not on Earth. He landed on something that felt like polished stone but behaved like soft gravity. The surface adjusted to his weight as though it had been waiting for him specifically, which was flattering in a deeply alarming way. Above him, the chamber was not large or small in any human sense. It was simply too aware. Light moved through it like disciplined thought. Structures rose and folded without deciding whether they were architecture or language. And then he saw her. The alien woman stood at the center of the chamber as if the room had been arranged to apologize for existing around her. She looked human enough to make his brain relax for half a second, and then immediately regret that decision. Her face was almost ordinary in its symmetry, almost comforting, like someone you might pass in a crowd and forget until you realized crowds did not normally contain individuals who seemed to understand the concept of gravity as a suggestion. Her ears, however, changed everything. They were long, elegant, extending slightly beyond her hair like carefully crafted instruments rather than biological features. They shifted subtly, as if listening to signals the universe forgot to label. She was not wearing armor or clothing in any Earth sense. Instead, she was wrapped in something that behaved like light when observed and like authority when ignored. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I just want to confirm," he said carefully, "that this is not one of those situations where I'm about to be asked to sign something emotionally permanent." The alien woman tilted her head slightly. "You are the designated human." "That sounds bureaucratic." "It is efficient." A pause stretched between them. Somewhere in the distance, something large and unseen shifted, like a political decision being made without asking permission from physics. Then she said it. "Marry me, or I destroy Earth." He stared at her. For a moment his brain tried to treat the sentence as metaphor, then satire, then an extremely advanced phishing scam. When none of those categories fit, it simply rebooted its emotional interface. "Sorry," he said slowly. "Could you run that by me again, but this time imagine I'm someone who doesn't have a planet in immediate jeopardy." Her expression did not change, but the air around her tightened slightly, as if the room itself disapproved of humor being used as a coping mechanism. "I require a binding alliance," she said. "The marriage is symbolic only in your cultural interpretation. It stabilizes political perception across 7 coalition sectors." He nodded once. "Right, so I'm a diplomatic spreadsheet. You are a stabilizing variable." "I've been called worse," he admitted, then immediately regretted making it sound like a compliment. She stepped closer. The movement was quiet, but the chamber reacted as though a law of physics had been updated. He felt the instinct to step back, but the floor gently disagreed with that idea. "I need Earth intact," she continued. "But I also need certainty. The Empire does not respond to uncertainty without violence." "Wow," he said. "That is extremely relatable actually, not the Empire part, the uncertainty violence part. I've been in group projects." A faint pause, he thought dangerously that she might have almost smiled, almost. Behind her, figures moved in silence. Tall beings with interfaces embedded in their skin, observing him like a problem that had wandered into the wrong equation. One of them leaned toward another and whispered something that translated awkwardly in his mind as, "Is this the species that invented complaining about weather as a philosophy?" "Yes," he muttered, "and we're very proud of it." The alien woman turned her gaze back to him. "You will come willingly," she said. "That's an interesting interpretation of or else," he replied. A second later, the room shifted again, not violently, just decisively, like reality had checked its schedule and decided he was now booked. As the chamber prepared to move him deeper into the Empire's structure, he looked once more at the long-eared woman who had just casually negotiated the fate of his entire species with the emotional tone of someone ordering tea. And he realized with a strange clarity that the most unsettling part was not the ultimatum. It was that she had not looked surprised when he started talking back. He decided fairly early on that alien captivity was significantly more organized than human captivity. There were schedules. That alone made it confusing. On Earth, if someone kidnapped you, they at least had the courtesy to be emotionally unpredictable about it. Here, everything was structured with the calm efficiency of a civilization that had never once lost a document titled, "Urgent Final Version Real this time." He was given what they called a stabilization corridor, which sounded comforting until he realized it was just a long, translucent pathway that subtly redirected him whenever he tried to walk in a direction that did not align with the Empire's current narrative about him. He tested it once. He tried to walk left. The corridor gently insisted he walk right. He tried again, slightly more aggressively. The corridor adjusted its persuasion style. By the third attempt, he was politely but unmistakably sliding sideways like a disappointed suggestion. "Okay," he said out loud. "So free will is technically available but emotionally discouraged." A nearby hovering interface blinked once, which he interpreted as agreement. He was eventually escorted into what appeared to be a waiting hall, though calling it a hall implied it waited for people in a conventional sense. The space rearranged itself depending on who entered, like it was constantly updating its opinion of architecture. He sat on a surface that might have been a chair or might have been a diplomatic stance. It was unclear. Across from him, a group of alien officials observed him. Their faces were too calm in ways that made him suspicious. One of them had eyes that flickered slightly when he blinked, as if blinking was a complicated internal vote rather than a reflex. He cleared his throat. "So," he said, "just to confirm, I'm not in immediate danger unless someone gets bored, right?" One of them tilted their head. The translation in his mind came through as, "Boredom is not a recognized imperial threat category." "That feels like a design flaw," he muttered. Another alien leaned forward. "You are the subject of the Queen's directive." He sighed. "I'm starting to feel like I should have brought snacks. Important life events are always better with snacks." A pause followed, as if the idea of snacks was being forwarded to multiple departments for analysis. Then the doors shifted open. She entered without announcing herself. She did not need to. The room simply reorganized its attention the way oceans reorganize around a submerged object. The alien woman, the Queen, looked at him with the same steady, unreadable focus. Her long ears angled slightly as she surveyed the room, catching signals he could not even guess at. She looked less like someone who entered a room and more like someone the room had been waiting to justify itself to. He raised a hand slightly. "Hi," he said, "so I've been thinking about your proposal." A faint pause. "I have follow-up questions." One of the officials made a sound that translated loosely into alarm. The Queen, however, lifted a hand. The room obeyed the gesture by becoming quieter, which he found both impressive and vaguely rude to physics. "You may speak," she said. "Great," he replied. "First question, is this marriage supposed to be romantic, or are we talking more like intergalactic tax filing status?" A small flicker passed across her expression. Not confusion. Not irritation, something closer to recalculation. "Neither," she said. "It is a binding diplomatic construct. So I'm a treaty with legs, you are an anchor point." That sounds worse somehow. One of the officials emitted what might have been a suppressed laugh. It quickly corrected itself into a cough that sounded like regret. The Queen stepped closer to him. The space between them felt like it had been edited. "I did not bring you here to confuse you," she said. "That's reassuring," he replied. Because I'm already at maximum confusion capacity, anything more and I might start becoming a government. There it was again, that almost smile, brief. Controlled, like it had to pass through multiple approvals before existing. Behind her, the empire continued its silent observation. He could feel it now, the weight of systems watching him, not as a person but as a variable that had suddenly refused to stay in its assigned equation. He leaned back slightly. Look, he said, on Earth marriage usually involves dinner first, sometimes even conversation, occasionally mutual consent depending on the century. That is inefficient, she replied. Romance tends to be inefficient, yes. I am not requesting romance. Yeah, he said. I gathered that somewhere between marry me and planetary extinction clause. A pause, then she spoke again, quieter. The empire is divided. That shifted the air. Even the officials behind her straightened as though the sentence had weight beyond language. She continued. If I do not secure a symbolic alliance with an external system, the internal factions will interpret uncertainty as weakness. He blinked. So let me get this straight. Your entire galactic government is basically held together by vibes, and I am now part of the vibe infrastructure. That is an imprecise but not incorrect interpretation. I hate how honest that is. She studied him for a moment longer, then added, Your species is not significant enough to threaten any faction. That is why you are ideal. He pointed at himself. So I'm politically neutral wallpaper. You are stable symbolism. That's a fancy way of saying random guy from Earth. Correct. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on what might have been diplomacy. Out of curiosity, he said, what happens if I say no? The room did not move. The Queen did not move, but something outside the room felt like it shifted its attention closer. She answered simply, Then I will be forced to select another anchor. That selection will likely involve force. Earth will be interpreted as resistant. He let out a long breath. Right, he said, so I'm not the hostage, I'm the preventive measure against worse paperwork. A pause, then unexpectedly she said, That is one interpretation. He looked at her, there it was again, something slightly off in her certainty, like she was repeating a decision she had made before fully agreeing with it. He leaned back. You know, he said, back home we have a saying. If someone offers you a job that involves saving the world, check if they're also the reason it needs saving. One of the officials made a noise that translated as, That is uncomfortably logical. The Queen's ears angled slightly. A subtle shift, like she was listening to something behind the conversation. For a brief moment, the vastness of the empire felt less like power and more like pressure. Then she said, You will remain here until the alignment ceremony. That sounds like I don't get a vote in the timing. You do not. Appreciated for the honesty again, he said. It's very refreshing in a terrifying way. She turned slightly, preparing to leave. Before she did, he added, One more question. She paused. Do I at least get to meet the catering team before I become a diplomatic spouse? A silence. Then one of the officials made a sound that was unmistakably laughter this time. The Queen did not respond verbally. But as she exited, the chamber seemed to recalibrate itself around the faint idea that perhaps, just perhaps, this human was going to be more complicated than originally budgeted. The ceremony did not begin the way he expected, mostly because he had expected something like a ceremony. There were no crowds in any traditional sense. No cheering, no chanting, no dramatic orchestral swell that made him feel like a protagonist instead of an administrative inconvenience. Instead, there was a structured silence filled with observing systems, as if the entire empire had collectively agreed to watch without interfering unless reality started behaving incorrectly. He stood at the center of a chamber that felt less like a room and more like a negotiated agreement between physics and authority. Beside him stood the alien queen. Her long ears shifted slightly, not in nervousness, but in focus, as if she were listening to layers of political probability unfolding in real time. She looked the same as before, composed, unreadable, dangerously calm, but now he noticed something he had missed earlier. She was not fully relaxed, not tense either. Something in between, like a ruler pretending the weight of 7 coalition sectors did not rest gently on her shoulders. He leaned slightly toward her. So, he whispered, is this the part where I'm supposed to feel emotionally significant, or is that in the premium version of the ceremony? A pause. Then very quietly she replied, you are already significant. That is the problem. That is not reassuring. Before he could continue, the chamber shifted. Not physically, conceptually. It was as if the Empire had decided that spoken language alone was inefficient, and now reality itself would participate in documentation. Light patterns unfolded in geometric sequences around them, recording intent, alignment, consequence. Somewhere in that shifting structure, he understood that this was not just marriage. It was a legal event so advanced it had stopped distinguishing between law, physics, and belief. He sighed. Okay, he said. On Earth, we usually just sign papers and regret it slowly. This feels more dramatic. A faint flicker of amusement passed through nearby observers. He had started noticing that laughter in this empire was rare, but not absent. It just required permission from at least 2 departments. The Queen stepped closer. The space between them stabilized. And then he felt it. Not pain, not pressure. Connection. Like his nervous system had briefly been asked to participate in a conversation with something much older than it was qualified to understand. A second presence brushed against his awareness, not invasive but undeniable, structured, intentional. He blinked hard. Is that normal? He asked. It is binding, she replied. That doesn't answer my question in any comforting direction. The connection deepened. He saw, not visually but conceptually, fragments of systems beyond the chamber. Coalition fleets suspended in silent negotiation. Political factions watching outcomes like gamblers pretending they were philosophers. Entire star regions balancing on a decision that had somehow been delegated to a human who still occasionally forgot to drink water. And underneath all of it, uncertainty. Not from the Empire, from her. He turned slightly toward the Queen. You're not fully sure about this, he said quietly. The chamber reacted instantly. A ripple passed through the observing systems. The officials stiffened. Even the geometry of the room seemed to hesitate. But she did not deny it. That was the most dangerous part. Instead, she said, I am certain of the consequences, not all of the intentions. He let out a slow breath. Yeah, he said, that tracks. I've made at least 4 major life decisions based on consequences instead of intentions. One of them was buying a toaster that judges me. A pause. The tension did not vanish, but it softened slightly, like the universe was unsure whether humor counted as diplomatic sabotage or emotional stabilization. He looked around. So let me summarize, he said. You brought me here to stop a galactic political meltdown because I'm statistically irrelevant enough not to offend anyone. Correct. And now I'm emotionally linked to you in a way that involves quantum bureaucracy. Correct. And if this doesn't work, Earth gets deleted from the narrative. Silence, then quietly, yes. He nodded slowly, cool, no pressure. Somewhere behind him, someone emitted what sounded like a suppressed laugh again, quickly corrected into professional neutrality. He turned back to her. You know what's funny? He said. On Earth, I thought my biggest fear was public speaking. That is illogical, she said. Oh, absolutely, but it was mine. A pause, then she said, you are not behaving like a subject under threat. He shrugged slightly. I think my brain has decided that panic is too expensive. It's switching to sarcasm subscription mode. That earned it, not a smile, but something closer. A controlled softening of expression that suggested she understood humor not as entertainment, but as a survival adaptation. The connection between them stabilized further, and suddenly the political noise beyond the chamber began to shift. He felt it like pressure changes in distant weather systems. Factions recalculating, fleets adjusting. Not because they were convinced by romance or symbolism, but because uncertainty had been reduced by something unexpected, unpredictability that was cooperating. He frowned slightly. So, he said, I think I'm accidentally doing diplomacy. You are, she replied. I feel underqualified. That is consistent with successful outcomes. He exhaled. The ceremony reached its final phase, the connection anchored. Not as ownership, not as possession, as alignment. A shared stabilizing point between 2 entirely different systems of logic, and then, as suddenly as it had begun, the intensity eased. The chamber did not collapse. It simply stopped insisting on explanation. Silence returned, not empty silence, resolved silence. He stood there for a moment, waiting for something dramatic to happen. Explosions, applause, a cosmic stamp of approval. Something that would confirm reality had officially updated his status. Nothing did. He looked at the Queen. "So," he said carefully, "are we done saving Earth now?" A pause, then she replied, "For now." "That is the least comforting 'for now' I have ever heard." "You are still alive," she said. "True, low bar, but I'll take it." Around them, the Empire's observers began to disperse. Not because they were bored, but because the outcome had been logged. The equation had stabilized. Attention in a civilization like this was always temporary once certainty was achieved. He and the Queen remained. For the first time since he arrived, there was no immediate threat pressing against the moment, just consequence. He looked at her. "So what happens next?" he asked. She considered. "You will remain as my consort," she said. He raised a hand slightly. "Pause, that word sounds like it comes with responsibilities I did not consent to emotionally understanding." "It is symbolic," she said. "Everything here is symbolic until it tries to delete my planet." A faint pause, then she added, "You will also assist in interfaction interpretation stability." He blinked. "That sounds like a job title invented by someone who hates joy." "It is necessary," he sighed. "Do I at least get holidays?" "Yes, defined how, randomized by your biological rhythm. That is either very generous or deeply invasive. I can't tell yet." For the first time, she turned her head slightly toward him in what felt almost like curiosity. "You are not afraid," she said. He thought about that, then shrugged. "I was," he said, "at the beginning, but then I realized something." "What?" "If an empire that can erase planets is this bad at communication, I'm probably safer being confusing." A pause, then she said something unexpected. "That is partially correct." He laughed, not nervously, actually laughed. It echoed in the chamber in a way that made several systems briefly reevaluate whether laughter should be categorized as a destabilizing signal or a maintenance function. He looked out toward the vast structure of the alien empire beyond the chamber walls, endless layers of order, politics, silence, and controlled chaos, and then back at her. "So," he said,